Hey guys, and welcome to another Schematics update. This time we want to talk about Project Hospital. More specifically, we will critiquing Project Hospital. And for that, I'm joined by Blind IRL, Billy MF Mace, and Jonty. Hey guys.
Hi.
Well, boy, howdy.
I thought this was the Red Dead Redemption 2 retrospective. Sorry. I'm on the wrong one. I'm just going to give me a second to take my cowboy hat and Stetsons off and I'll be with you, okay?
We should start with the obvious. What is Project Hospital?
So Project Hospital is a in-depth hospital building sandbox, kind of in the vein of The Sims and older games such as Theme Hospital, but with a much more realistic take. It has some interesting mechanics and was been brought to us by a relatively small indie team. This is a game that we have been keeping an eye on for a while. If you've been following Schematics for a while, we've covered it in the past, as well as interviewing them a while ago and looking at their trailers. This is going to be an interesting one to talk about because the final release version that we just got code for is lackluster in a number of respects and also kind of filled with indie jank to the point where a couple of people talking here today genuinely thought this game was in early access.
Yeah.
First off, let's just talk about what we like.
Let me start there. I really like the building mode. There are basically three different modes in the game. First of all, you kind of lay the floor, then you assign rooms to the floor, and then you start the building. There are tons and tons and tons of different rooms that you can basically decorate how you want. Besides certain objects that need to be in the room to be fully functional, and I really like that. I don't know about you guys, especially maybe Jonty, because you're the most creative builder here.
I'm a huge fan of the build mode in this, and I think the main thing I like about it is the freeform nature of it. So like you were saying, there are two sort of sections to the build mode. There's one where you actually sort of lay out the blueprint almost of rooms, as in you actually draw on the floor this amount of space, this sort of 5x10 block or whatever is going to be a GP office as far as the game's concerned. So the game knows it's a GP office. And corridors and receptionists and all those work separately. The one thing I really like about this is these aren't tied to walls. So you can have a reception area and then a large waiting room area that then goes into a corridor that has a GP room off it, and that's all very one big open space, which is quite realistic, and you can get some nice realistic layouts, whereas you compare it to something like Theme Hospital or the more recent 2 Point Hospital, you very much have these little islands of rooms that all sort of sit in their own little boxes. The other thing about this is you can completely decide where walls and doors go, so you can have in some of your larger rooms, for instance, like an X-ray room or something, you can build a wall inside the room for people to stand behind. You can have multiple entrances to rooms. You can have rooms off other rooms, so you can have a staff room with a staff-only toilet attached directly to the staff room, so the staff haven't got to come out and go into it. You can have, if you wanted to, a lavatory sat in the middle of a waiting room. The freeform nature of the gameplay of the building gameplay there is something I really like, and like you say, there are certain things that have to go in a room. So for instance, a GP office has to have a PC, a chair, and an examination table or something like that. But then there are also lots more things you can do, some things that are purely cosmetic, posters, cabinets, things like that, but then also items that will give your GPs more equipment to use to actually do the diagnosis. So you can place down sort of blood test machines, hearing machines, things like that, and all those will actually then get used by the GP to get a higher percentage. So it all sort of feeds back into the gameplay as well. So yeah, I'm really impressed by it.
And the variety of items you can place down is actually kind of ludicrous. Like when you load into a save that you haven't designed yourself, it makes your mind just immediately explode because you're just like, there's 1,000 things on the floor here and I don't know what any of them do. And it's, even when you've been playing the game for a bit, it's a little bit overwhelming, and I don't think that's a bad thing. There's a lot there and a lot to learn, which I think is quite compelling.
I'm a big fan of the building mode too. It's pretty simple, but there's just so many options in terms of, like, you know, one hand, you can just, the wall placement is incredibly easy, but how you decorate your rooms and how you even decorate your walls with windows with different wallpapers is, you have a lot of options. It can be a little overwhelming, but it's really, once you get down into it, it feels pretty intuitive. But for me, the real shining star is where you can diagnose patients. And that's really what makes this game stand out for me. For those that don't know, if you would like to, you can basically basically override your doctors and, treat a patient yourself. You can run a few diagnostic tests, or some examinations. You can then, come to a diagnosis, and then you can prescribe treatments. And, it's not always just like, oh yeah, this is always the correct answer, go with this. Sometimes you can misdiagnose, and sometimes the patients will come back with even worse symptoms because you made a mistake. And, they're dealing with, a progressively worse disease or ailment, while also dealing with probably ineffective treatment. Maybe you gave them the wrong medication and things have gone awry.
And this is really cool to me personally, because I think that mechanic is actually borderline educational. We talked about this in a previous video, but I actually found myself like looking into this stuff and going like, man, I've never heard of any of this and I don't know how to pronounce any of these words. Let's go over to Google and find out how I pronounce this.
Yeah, I thought I was maybe the only one. I didn't want to say it in case it made me sound thick.
Nope.
But I had to Google, what was it? Oh, it was just a chronic pain condition. I did a diagnosis and they were diagnosed with chronic pain. And I thought, God, I have absolutely no idea how I would cure that. And there was about 8 or 9 different curing options. Some of them only appeared because I'd built certain other diagnosis rooms and stuff, and I had to go and Google to see what sort of chronic fatigue it was actually. Yeah, chronic fatigue. I had to go see what a doctor would actually prescribe for it. Yeah, so it was actually quite interesting. Yeah,
and then you look at that and then you're like, man, I can do that in this video game, and that part of this game I think is really compelling.
There are some errors though. I had a patient that was like, yeah, maybe it's the forearm is broken or the upper part of the arm is broken, and I was like, with an open flesh wound, and I was like, well, you could see that. Why does the patient need X-ray now to see which part is broken? But these are just small errors. In general, I really like the diagnosis.
Sorry, one thing that happened with me in that context was that I had a patient come in with weight loss and dehydration. And in my experience, I'm like, okay, get a blood test. We're going to test to see if this person is diabetic. Mm-hmm. It wouldn't really let me do that. And I think that's sadly a bit of a shame, where it does kind of like guide you a little bit, like saying, no, these are the examinations that you want to do because these are the possible diagnoses that you can do. And it's like, well, I kind of wish there was a mode that didn't hold my hand. I also kind of wish there was a mode that didn't tell you what the hidden symptoms were or how many there were.
Well, like a hardcore mode kind of thing?
Kind of, but just more in a way where you really can feel like you're a doctor and you have to play the guessing game and you can exercise that problem-solving skill even more.
I think that's it. I think in real life, medical science is can be a very grey science, and at some point, a video game has to boil it down to ones and zeros, and this plus this plus this equals this. Whereas in real life, obviously, it can be very like you say, for instance, some diabetics put weight on, some diabetics lose weight, some are dehydrated, some have water retention. So at some point the game has to kind of say, well, no, these are the tick boxes that this game knows about. So you are always going to be a little bit limited there. But still, as far as the feature goes, I don't think I've seen anything like this, at least to this extent, in similar games, really, and not just hospital games. The ability to sort of zoom in a little bit on your simulation and sort of basically take the reins over from the AI characters and say, do you know what, I'm going to do it for a bit. And I really like the fact that it is completely optional. Other than a few challenges, I think sometimes a challenge will say, go in and do it yourself. If you want to, you can just let it completely run itself, which is good, because I think if you had to do this for every patient, it would get incredibly micromanagey. But it is nice sometimes just to be able to say, no, do you know what, I'm going to pick. All I've been doing is picking a guy as they walk through the door. I'm like, do you know what? Yeah, you're me. I'm going to look after you and see how we get on.
I think also a benefit is that the time scale is fairly slow in this game.
Very.
Where if you really wanted to micromanage every single patient, you could probably do that.
Yep, you could pause, micromanage, pause. I don't know how well it would work on stream though, which is the way I play most games. So,
well, you ask chat how to diagnose your patients.
They die.
Full cavity.
Yeah, they would just die. It would if I played this on stream and asked chat how to do it, every single one would get anal cavity search and death. Like, they go in with a sore throat. Anal cavity search.
You know it, right?
Oh boy.
Well, what else is there?
Well, that sounds so bad. So let's get over to the things we dislike.
There's not enough anal cavity searches.
So moving on, if you'll notice, we talked a whole lot about one or two mechanics and the building mode. We talked a lot about the actual construction, the multiple floor building, the depth in that side. But that, I think, is where problems begin. We don't have much structure. There is very little in the way of direction for the actual gamified side of this very interesting, compelling sandbox that they have constructed. This begins with when you load up the game, the main menu seems kind of sparse. You have a variety of sandbox maps that you can hop into, some partially built hospitals that you can hop into and work on, and then a handful of tutorials, which are helpful, very important, you should play those, and then a couple campaigns, which are essentially, hey, let's test what you learned in the tutorials. And then beyond that, we have some challenges which are harder and set you up with partially screwed up hospitals that you have to go in and fix. Those suffer from the issue that I mentioned earlier, where if you're running a hospital that you don't already understand, that you built yourself, it's going to be cumbersome and very difficult to kind of get over that hump.
You're going to have to spend 10, 15 minutes just looking around the place and finding where stuff is. One thing I will say is the amount of customization that this game gives you, it means it's not very readable once it's built up. One thing that I know I keep comparing it to 2 Point Hospital, but let's be honest, even though they are quite different games, the comparisons are going to be made. And one thing that game does really well is, it has really great silhouettes, it has really great readability. Even from quite a zoomed out view, I can go, yep, there's a GP, there's a toilet, there's a guy with a light bulb for a head. All these things are very readable. Whereas with Project Hospital, I've literally just loaded up a campaign just to kind of see it, and it's a hot mess. Like, I'm really having to zoom in and go, okay, that's a GP's office. Okay, yeah, okay, I understand this, and I'm having to really go through. So,
for a management game, you surprisingly have very little tools to manage your hospital. Like, hey, with a department, why don't I have an inventory list of the diagnostic equipment that I have? Or something simple to where, like, the readability for the art style can be, it's very cluttered in certain offices. You would want a list of all the equipment that you have, and also maybe even a list of the equipment that you don't, so that like, hey, what test can I run, and what test can't I run? So that way you're not like in a scenario and you're just like, oh, this patient has this, but you can't test it. It's like, really? I thought we had that. We'll just send them away.
I do need to say that I do really like the art style. I like that
same.
there's a serious like undertone to the look of the game, and especially when you have things like an emergency, like an ambulance comes in, you have a mass trauma event. There's just blood everywhere. It's visceral. it's intense, and I think that the art style looks really good and animates really nicely and is easy to look at when you're the one that constructed the hospital. Problems only arise when you are popping into something that somebody else designed and it wasn't your brain that just built the whole thing and you know what's going on already.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it's a realistic take on the hospital sim genre, and you kind of see that because if you just randomly pop into several rooms in a real hospital, you know shit about what's going on there.
You're gonna get lost
because they simply look very similar. So we have that too, and I kind of want to move on to the point that it's really hard to restructure, because sometimes you need to restructure, especially I think it was the second campaign map. It's inefficient, the hospital, and you need to restructure it so it works better. And it's, to be honest, it's a pain in the ass to restructure it, because I don't know how you played it, Billy, but I kind of removed everything and stripped it all naked but the outer walls of the hospital, and I was trying to rebuild it. But as long as you have like a doctor or a nurse or whatever assigned to a room to work there, even if you removed like saying what room this is, at least the working desk or the chair that a doctor is assigned to, you can't remove that because it's assigned. And I was like, what?
Yeah, when your game basically tells you like, hey, make some changes, and the only change you can make is to fire everybody and restructure every room like that, you're not in a good position.
It's just like game development.
Oh no.
Yeah, you're basically burning the whole thing down to start again. I think this is where the game sort of falls down for me, really. It's loads of just little quality of life stuff that you would kind of expect these days, and this, I think, is why I still thought this was in early access, because I kept thinking, oh, that's probably something that will come. And it's little things, really. There's no undo button. There's no undo option at all. There's no, that I know of, multi-select tool for moving stuff. So you are sort of moving individual items. And just little things like, for instance, if you place down a counter and then put a sink on top of it, I would then think that if I picked up that counter, the sink would come with it.
Nope.
But it doesn't. So you can't move the counter because then the sink's left floating. So you have to pick up the sink, but then you have to put the sink on another counter. You can't just put the sink down somewhere else for now. You either have have to put down a second counter, move the sink, and then delete the first counter, or delete the sink, then move the counter to where you want to go, and then rebuy the sink. And it's just little things. It probably sounds a little bit anal for me to think about them, but it's these sort of things that really make the difference between really enjoying a game and
a clunky experience,
pushing through a game. Yeah, it is. It's clunky, and it's these little things that really kind of make the flow. And I think that they're the main ones for me, really. Just the quality of life when it becomes to actually, like you say, rearranging, moving stuff. Because I feel at the moment that when I place down an item, that's where it stays. Sometimes you might put a few things down and then go, actually, we could do with getting an oxygen tank in here, and that means I could do with moving a few things around, and it just becomes too much of a chore to move things around.
Another thing that kind of ties into that is there is no staff list, because, and I figured that out there is a staff list.
It's awful.
Don't get me wrong. It's hard to find. You need to click on at least half a dozen icons to get there, and it's awful. Yeah,
I don't feel like I'm necessarily playing a management sim. I feel like I'm playing more of a I don't know what's the best way to describe it is. I almost feel like an ant farm. Like you kind of put everything down and then press go and kind of see if it works. And then if it doesn't, you press pause and then redo it, and then press go again and see if it works. It's almost like a tower defense type kind of gameplay.
But at least with a tower defense, you have every round to make decisions and repairs, and then to think about the next wave. In this game, that ant farm mentality, it does exist and it's prevalent in it. I do agree with that, but it's rather detrimental in this case, because it feels like, I'll just do this one thing and then forget about it and then never touch it again.
But it looks so good. Seriously, if you have a department that works, just let it run and look at it. It's so chill.
Yeah, it is quite satisfying to see everyone run.
We've talked about this so many times with other games in the past, you've basically made if you've made a game that's satisfying to watch once it's working, and then just add in some form of event to throw a wrench in there and break it every now and again so you have to fix it. To me, that is a very compelling gameplay loop, and that is what this game does. It has, when you have everything set up and it's working and it's running well, you have a very compelling loop of, okay, well, all of the easy patients are just being taken care of, and every now and again I'll pop in and deal with something major that my doctors can't handle, even if that requires opening up Wikipedia, which I had to do this morning. When that's working, it's...
And now imagine me not being native English speaker.
But kind of the moment you run into the little issues that break the game, whether that's the cumbersome UI, which is true, and UI is learnable. I play a lot of RimWorld, I've played Dwarf Fortress, I can learn UI, that's not a problem, it just takes a while. When you kind of hit those issues, and then when you realize that the game has no structure, it does fall apart. And I do like this game, I need to be clear on that.
This kind of leads me on to my topic that I mentioned before we started recording, and the idea of time. Surely an end of development, but I, until 20 odd minutes ago, thought this game was in early access, and it wasn't until we started talking that you said, no, it's not, this is 1.0, this is a full release, and you were saying that you don't really think that in this day and age, in 2018, early access is a needed thing, even a good thing. And I'm interested to talk about that, because I think if this was an early access title, I might be a little bit more forgiving about some of the issues it has.
Here's the thing that I need to just blatantly state. The state that this game is in is not uncommon for the genre. If you played Transport Fever, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's not uncommon for a game like this to come out, be a full release title, and not have any structure. Railroad Empire had a full-on campaign, but I think they're kind of uncommon when it comes to this genre, especially when you're looking at smaller teams. Hell, look at City Skylines. Yeah. That game never had structure. And as far as early access goes, if this game launched into early access, I genuinely believe that this game would tank. And the reason for that is there is such a stigma now with early access that if you put a product into early access in 2018, you're not even going to be on that release schedule, which is damning. In a world where Steam is so fucking oversaturated, you can't get a small project noticed without a huge amount of marketing and a ton of backing. If the game releases and it's in early access, people will just look at it and be like, early access, whatever, and they'll move on with their day. Are there games doing well in early access right now? Yes, but I think that your likelihood of success and your likelihood of selling enough copies to be able to continue updating your game is significantly less likely in early access. than it is with a full release title.
I also think that it's a case too where now that the game is released, the development team can then ask themselves, where do they want to go next? They're not tethered to Project Hospital. They can make a sequel, they can make a spin-off game where you're mainly focusing on diagnosing patients, which I would love to see, or they can just do something completely different. You know, that I think the problem with a lot of games and game development cycles these days is that everybody is so focused on developing one game for like 6+ years. Yeah, no matter what, time is never kind to a game. You're always going to get less and less players over time from launch or from the release of your early access client, until like you're never going to see a huge spike in player base unless you do an expansion or unless you do something like really bizarre. But that would, as Blind would say, require a lot of marketing at that point. And it's fine that this game has been fully released and is not in early access, but unfortunately the polish is just not there.
I kind of agree with both of you, meaning Blind and Billy and Jonty, because I totally see the point Jonty's trying to make here. When I opened up the game and played the version before it was released, and I was talking to Blind briefly, and I was saying, so, yeah, well, I mean, it's an early access game, and Blind was like, no, it isn't, it's out. And I was kind of surprised, because there are issues, really small issues, yelled at me. I'm an early access game, and these gonna be fixed. Steam is super oversaturated with early access games, and a lot of them are treated badly. Early access is some sort of stigma, but some games profit by being early access, even if it's just half a year. And I have the feeling this game should have been in development or in further development for a good 6 months.
Even looking at recent games that we've talked about, Parkasaurus, that game is in early access and is doing decent. But how long are they going to be in early access for, and how long is that early access money going to last them?
And again, it's only going to hemorrhage over time.
Like, I don't want to talk smack about them. I like those guys. That game is good. Like, they're making a cool product, and I hope it gets finished. I genuinely pray it gets finished. It's at the point now where you roll the RNG dice. Like, hell, look at the video that we just put up on a game called Mad Tower Tycoon. That game isn't selling gangbusters. Like, are they going to be in early access for 6 months? Did they make enough money to keep going for 6 months? Do they have money in the bank? Why did you even put it up in early access to begin with in that case? Why not just put out a full game in a year if you already have the money? It's a very scary thing. I think, honestly, what we should do is we should wrap this topic up in a nice little box and make another video on this, because early access is a very, very scary thing.
It's interesting. I think it probably comes down to individual games, really, as opposed to a blanket statement. Thinking about it, because I was just thinking then while you were talking, I'd be okay with this now being in 1.0 release, as long as they kind of say, yeah, we're planning on adding undo, we're planning on adding multi-select, we're planning on adding some quality of life stuff. A hex color code would be nice, as opposed to the 8 ice cream flavors that you get with stuff in the game at the moment. So I'd like to see that. As they said, this kind of stuff come in, then that's all good. Because I look at other games that are out recently that have got full releases. Planet Coaster, to an extent, 2 Point Hospital, they all came out with certain necessary, I'm using air quotes here, features missing, and they've since added a few of them, or all of them, and I've kind of been okay with it. So yeah, I think it depends on. I think rather than me thinking this is early access because there's X missing and X missing, I think, like Billy says, it just comes down to a bit of a polish.
I kind of have the feeling we're in the wrapping up round here. So, Blind, your feelings about the game?
I mean, this is a really tough one. And I know I do these kind of, like, when we do these criticizing videos, I often come out the other end with it's not for everyone. 100,000%. I mean, I've played and enjoyed and put a lot of hours into a lot of games with absolutely no structure and no traditional campaign. So I don't think this game needs that. I agree that it's lacking some polish, but those are all problems that can be fixed. I think at the end of the day, if you're like me and you just love a good sandbox with some interesting mechanics, fun to look at art, and maybe a little bit of indie jank, because at the end of the day, it's a small team, this one's absolutely worth their asking price. It's not ludicrously expensive. It's not crazy out of the realm of something that you could pick up. It's a game you can get time out of easily, even just messing around in the sandbox and not even touching the challenges, which are fun if you can like take the time to kind of stare at the hospital and figure out how everything works. I think it's a good game. I think they've made a good product here. I just think it's lacking in a few polished departments, which can be fixed.
Because I think you should pick up the scenarios or the campaign, because it kind of helps you to understand the game more than the tutorials did. And I kind of think, looking at the current critique we have on the game, like, it's hard to restructure. Maybe it's wise to check out the challenges as well, because they kind of show you how to deal with it before you start your sandbox map and be like 10 hours in and completely rage because you made a tiny mistake. I'd say do that first, maybe before you go into the sandbox. I kind of really like the game. I really do, actually. But on the other hand, some of the critique we have is like really hard to forget while playing the game, because it's just a pain in the ass. I really hope they're gonna fix them, and I'm pretty sure they will.
Yeah, for me, I fully agree with Advo. Play the campaign. It's part of the game. You know, you pay money for this game. Enjoy what it has to offer if you can. But for me, like, you know, I do disagree with the fact that you need it's been more implied. You can have a campaignless game and still have structure and direction for your game. And this game sadly just lacks that, because it kind of wants to dip its toes in everything. It wants to be a building game. It wants to be a traditional hospital management game. It wants to allow the player to play doctor. And it doesn't really walk the line that smoothly between like those three main categories. It just kind of flounders a little bit. Nothing really works terribly well. Nothing really goes further. And it feels like, you know, the dev team just kind of saw management games as they have existed for like 20 plus years and said, okay, we'll just do that, but with hospitals and maybe with a little bit of a twist. But there's really not a unique direction with this game that exists, that's fully realized. There's bits and pieces of it that exist within the diagnostic gameplay, but because that's where you actually problem solve. I wish they would go further with that. I feel like if they did, the game would be richer. It would be more unique, but you know, here we are. And I think that's just something more developers, not just nearly everybody, just ask themselves, what is the experience they actually want to make before they, you know, kind of put all this time and effort into the game and then kind of make something that's a little too familiar compared to everything else. So what do you think, Jonty?
I pretty much said how I feel about it. I think that's a really good point there. I think what we've ended up with here is quite a fun, creative game. I think we have to remember that the people who play games like this, like me, for instance, like a lot of us, with Planet Coaster and City Skylines and this, where we spend hours placing each individual thing down, I think we're actually quite a small minority, and I think a lot of people prefer a bit more of a almost like a hand-holding, really, sort of like, here's the game, here's the boxes you have to tick, here's the end goal, and head to it. So I think it is important still that a game has structure. Even if me personally, I'm quite happy with a big box of sand. I think it is still quite important for games to have a lot of structure. And if you're looking at this and you're listening to our preview and you're thinking, well, maybe that's, you know, this does look a little bit in depth, this does look a little advanced for me. The good thing is that you have got 2 Point Hospital, which is a much more of a pick up and play kind of title. But if you've got 2 Point Hospital and you find it a little bit, simple, because it is relatively simple once everything's set up, but 2, it's also a little stressful because there are, even no matter how well run you have a hospital in 2 Point Hospital, there are still people running all over the place and throwing up and ghosts around and everything. So if you want something that's a bit more chill and a bit more realistic, I think this is definitely the one for you.
That's a wonderful sentence to end with. First of all, I want to thank Jonty and Billy and Blind for joining me today and talking about Project Hospital. And thanks to you guys out there for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, hit the smash button. You know, we love it. If you really enjoyed this video, you may want to consider going over to Coffee to buy Ed, our editor, a coffee, because he's in his hospital and he has no insurance and he desperately needs money and a coffee, so he's awake.
For an anal cavity search.
Demonetized. Anyway, guys, thanks a lot for listening again. See you next time. Bye.
Bye.
So long.